Hi, everyone. Let's see. I'm gonna get this chat box up. How's everyone doing? Sorry, I'm not trying to be unprofessional. Got a call from my 3-year-old's school that he just threw up and has a fever. So I'm gonna go run and get him as soon as this is over. Okay. So how was everyone's experience? No one needs to care about that. How's everyone's experience? I have the chat box open, so let's spend the first couple minutes, per usual, discussing how everyone's week was this past week, if anyone tried any other coping mechanisms for stress. Someone was asking, I have the webinar chat up if anyone wants to put anything in the chat. Someone was asking, whoa, oh, that's weird. I made a slide, but it didn't get in there. I made a slide that had listed the skills that we have gone over thus far. In case it's helpful, it was make an advantages list and read it, response cards, eat sitting down, eat slowly and mindfully, give yourself credit, differentiate between hunger and non-hunger. That was the first experiment. Decatastrophize hunger. That was the hunger experiment. And then there was, what do we do after that? Cravings and emotional eating. So that's what we have gone over thus far. Today, just so you know, we're going to be going over eat according to a schedule, how to stay on track with everything I've just listed, and perhaps most significantly of all, how to get back on track if and when you make mistakes. So let's see, I see a few chats. When I was hungry an hour or two before dinner, I told myself I'll be fine to wait. So I did. Good for you. I hope you gave yourself credit when you did that, like huge amounts of credit. I would be interested to know, like, if you were paying attention in that hour, how uncomfortable did it get? Was it at worst mild? Did you find that it comes and goes? I think I mentioned this last time, but I mentioned to my coaching group too. Whenever I get hungry an hour before lunch, I say to myself, this is as bad as it gets, and this isn't bad, and you're not even going to feel it for the whole hour. And I just find those two reminders to be so incredibly helpful at just taking the legs out of fear of hunger. Someone said, great, actually, it started coming together for me last week. Isn't that so exciting when things start to gel? I'm so glad to hear that. Let's see, does anyone else have any comments? Or if not, let's see. Someone said, had many occasions of great choosing better options and added to the list of giving myself credit. Awesome. Had one day of slip and kept focusing on that, wondering about tips to focus on the slip. Well, good. We're going to talk about the slip today. So you are right on target. How to stay present with eating with others. It is very hard. And I think I've mentioned this before. I don't have any, if anyone has any great tips on how to stay present when eating with others, I would love to know. I think it is very difficult to be present when you're eating with others, but I think that, if nothing else, if you can portion off how much you're going to eat, that can be helpful. So at least you're not overeating. And if you can eat super slowly, that can help. So I think the slower you can eat when you're eating with other people, and at least if you portion off, then you're not overeating. I also think sometimes, like if I'm eating with someone else and I realize, ooh, I'm eating too quickly, or I'm not eating mindfully, I'll like discreetly glance at my watch. I'll put my watch down. I'll put my fork down for a minute, and I'll say, all right, you can pick your fork back up in a minute. It just sort of gives me like a mental reset. Someone says taking small bites helped when eating with others. I think that's true. Someone says I'm the slowest eater. Yes, I had a client who he volunteered at the suicide prevention hotline on Fridays, and they always had pizza for the volunteers. And he said in the past, because there's only so much pizza, he would eat as fast as he could so that he could go. He was like running a race with his, colleagues, not that anyone else knew, but he would eat as fast as he could so that he could go back and get more. And so he came up with the concept of running a reverse race, meaning that when the pizza came, we decided, because it was relatively small, we decided that, and he was a tall person, we decided that 3 pieces wasn't a reasonable amount of pizza. He would get his 3 pieces, he would sit down, and then he was running a reverse race, meaning he was trying to be the last one to finish. So especially like at holiday meals and stuff, having the goal of being the last one to finish can be helpful. Oh, sorry, I meant not focusing on the slip. Yes, we will talk about focusing, to what degree it's appropriate to focus on the mistakes, and then to what degree it's unhelpful. We will talk about that today. So let's dive in. As I mentioned, here is the agenda. So I'm gonna close the chat box, and then I will have the Q&A up at the end. So here's our agenda for week 5. First, we're going to talk about the skill of eat according to a schedule. Next, we're going to talk about how you stay on track with all of the skills we've talked about thus far, and I will review them. And then, incredibly significantly, we will talk about the skill of getting back on track following a mistake. You are supposed to make mistakes in this process. This is a learning process like any other. This is a skill acquisition process like any other. Nobody would ever expect to learn to play the piano without hitting a wrong note. Nobody would ever expect to learn to play tennis without missing a ball, but people do tend to think, oh, I should never make mistakes when it comes to eating, when in fact, yes, you should. You are supposed to make tons of mistakes, and we'll talk about what we do when that does happen. Okay, so, whoops. Here is the skill of eat according to a schedule. And essentially what this means is you eat at set times throughout the day. And we give ranges. It's not like it has to be, breakfast is at 9 a.m. on the dot, and lunch has to be at 12:04, and afternoon snack is at 4:30, right? Like ranges are reasonable, like somewhere between a half hour, an hour, maybe 2 hours. Like breakfast is 9 to 10 or something. Lunch is 12 to 2. Afternoon snack is 3:30 to 4:30. Dinner is 6 to 8, depending on the day and what have you. And the reason that we really like this skill for people, and we have found it makes a really big difference, is because even though you have done the experiment to learn the difference between hunger and non-hunger, even though you have done the experiment of the hunger experiment and really learned, hopefully, to decatastrophize hunger, what we find is that for anyone who's ever struggled with his or her eating, it is really hard to tell the difference all of the time between, is this hunger? Is this stress? Am I just feeling tired? Maybe I'm thirsty. We find that people never quite get good at telling the difference. And to nuance this a bit, I think people do learn to accurately identify hunger, but I think a lot of times they are not quite accurate at identifying non-hunger. It is just so easy for non-hunger, whatever is causing it, to mask itself as actual hunger. And so when someone doesn't have a schedule that they follow each day, or when they don't have some idea of the times they eat and the times they don't eat, what that means is anytime they think about food or anytime they think about eating, and if you're like a lot of my clients, this can come up like at least every 15 minutes, right? Every time they think about food, they have to make that assessment. Should I eat right now? Should I not eat right now? Is this hunger? Maybe this is just stress. Every time they think about food or eating, they have to, make an assessment and make a decision. And first of all, that leaves a lot of room for error. And also, there really is such a thing as decision fatigue, meaning the first decision you make in a day, you'll be in a much stronger position than the 50th decision that you make in a day. So when you eat according to a schedule, what that means is you essentially only have to make one decision a day, which is stick to my schedule. And I know that in a real way, this flies in the face of intuitive eating, at least to some degree. But what I'm trying to say here is that we have found that people's internal sense of hunger, people's internal, eating sense is just not reliable. If it was reliable, they wouldn't be in the position that they're in, right? So their internal sense of whether or not they're hungry, their internal sense of whether or not they should be eating at any given point is not reliable. What is completely reliable? The clock. The clock is a very reliable tool to tell you whether or not to eat. And what I really like about the skill of eat according to a schedule is that it can help people on both ends of the spectrum. We have the people who are eating way too much, way too often throughout the day. And then we also have the people who are in the habit of like not eating all day at all, and then way overeating at night. So when you eat at sort of structured times throughout the day, it can really make a big difference, whichever eater you are. It can help you, refrain from eating way too often, or it can make sure you're prioritizing eating at somewhat regular times. Another reason why this is so helpful is because let's say it is 10:30 a.m. and a really stressful work thing just fell in your lap and you want to eat in response to it. And you recognize, hey, this isn't hunger. I'm just feeling stressed. It doesn't then mean that you don't want to eat, right? It's not like, oh, just recognizing hunger is not motivating it then completely means, oh, now I'm so happy not to eat. No, like you still want to eat in that moment, right? But if you know, okay, well, 10:30 is now the time I eat lunch at 12, it can really help you maybe incentivize you to try other stress relieving techniques and power through until 12 when it is actual time for lunch. And so the beauty of eat according to a schedule is it means you don't have to go through the day constantly assessing, what is this I'm feeling? Is this hunger? Is this not hunger? Is this just stress? Is this me being tired? Is this just because I'm angry? The answer is if it's not time to eat, it doesn't matter why you want to eat, what's causing it. If it's not time to eat, you just don't eat. And there is absolutely no right schedule that any one person should be following. The right schedule that you should be following is the one that you can actually follow. Back when we were first doing this work 14, 15 years ago, you seriously could not find a magazine article or a research paper or anything that didn't say that breakfast wasn't important. Everyone is one of those truisms we all believe. Breakfast was important. If people skip breakfast, they were more likely to go on and eat too much later on in that day. And while that did absolutely turn out to be true for some people, we've seen it's absolutely not true for other people. I have some clients who are very successfully doing intermittent fasting, meaning like they don't eat before 11 a.m. or they don't eat before 12 p.m. And I have some clients that would completely not work for them. I have one client who on the days she skips breakfast, it sort of sends her brain the message, oh, we don't have to follow through with being healthy today. And then she's actually, if she skips breakfast, much less likely to go on to have a good eating day. And I have another client who we have found, so that's more the psychological impact. I have another client who we have found that physical impact, that if she skips breakfast, she is more likely to overeat later in the day because she feels really hungry or she feels somewhat deprived from not having breakfast. And then, like I'm saying, I have other clients who we have found not eating breakfast impacts them zero. In fact, for some people, it's actually helpful. So I know it can be confusing and a bit murky to try and figure out what system is right for you, in which case it may just be a bit of trial and error. Whenever I have a new client in my office and we are first talking about this skill, we're always saying, okay, this first week, let's take a stab at it. Let's try breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, or something, 3 meals and 3 snacks. And then she might come back to me and say, you know what, I was never hungry for my snack between breakfast and lunch. And we say, okay, great, good information. Let's eliminate it. You don't need a snack then. So hear me again when I say there is no right or wrong when it comes to the schedule. The best schedule is the one that you can actually follow. I had a client once and he had been to see I think it was a nutritionist, and she had said to him, you need to be eating 6 mini meals throughout the day. And she was probably right. If he had eaten 6 mini meals throughout the day, maybe that would have maximized his his ability to lose weight or whatever, but it completely did not work for him. He was not able to actually do it, in which case that actually wasn't the right schedule for him to follow because it wasn't one he could actually stick to. Now, a bit of self-disclosure, one of the things I often will tell my clients is that for me, the schedule I personally follow is breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, snack. I eat 2 snacks in the evenings, one a little bit after dinner, and then one, soon before bed. And people always say to me, well, you can't lose weight or you can't be healthy or whatever if you're eating, late in the evening. And I say, of course you can. You can't lose weight if that's your goal, eating, an extra 300 unplanned calories every evening. But when you work it into your day as a whole, you absolutely can. Might I be like 1.5 pounds lighter if I didn't eat that second snack right for bed? Maybe, but it would be totally not worth it to me because my evenings would be so difficult. Here's the way in which I know, I am so convinced that people are wired differently. My husband, who does not have a weight problem, could, or has never had a weight problem, just has never struggled, could eat dinner at 6 p.m. and go to bed at 11 p.m. and not think about food once. If I ate dinner at 6 p.m. and went to bed at 11 p.m., I personally think about food like every 15, 20, 30 minutes. So for me, having two snacks really anchors my evening, because it means I eat dinner and then I have my snack a little bit later. And then, I'm thinking about food, but I know you've got your second snack coming up. I have my second snack. I'm able to wait because, I know exactly when I get to eat next, eat my second snack, and then I go to bed. So for me personally, that works really, really, really well. I have other clients where two planned snacks in the evening for 100 different reasons just wouldn't work for them. But the reason that I bring up my two snack in the evening plan is because it hopefully will help you realize that there are so many different ways that you can go about this. And it probably likely will take some trial and error to figure out exactly what we think is going to work best for you. And that's fine. You don't have to get it right the first time. I know this probably is obvious, but in terms of like number of meals and number of snacks, we're not talking yet, although we will next week, I promise. We're not talking yet about how much you're eating. We're just talking about how you're eating, sitting down slowly and mindfully. We're talking about why you're eating, cravings, emotional eating. And now we're talking about the when you're eating. And then next week, we'll actually start talking about like the what and the how much. But even though we're not talking about the what and the how much yet, we will, in a week. And so if you're eating 3 meals and no snacks, it means every time you eat, it's probably bigger. If you're eating 3 meals and 3 snacks, it means every time you eat, it's probably smaller. And again, I know I've already said this many times today, there is just no right or wrong. It's about what personally works for you. Excuse me. So that's eat according to a schedule, which is where you eat a set number of meals and snacks with times attached to it. And that is really, if we can do it, my preferred way of doing it, because the other way of doing this is eat according to a structure. And that means you eat a set number of meals and snacks, but with no times attached to it. So I know I'm going to be eating 3 meals and 2 snacks today, but I just don't know when those meals are going to be. And that's for people, our nurses, our people in healthcare who they just don't get a reliable lunch break. Like they don't know if they're going to be stuck at work for 45 minutes or for an extra 4 hours. So for some people, we really can't put times attached to it because it's just not predictable enough. But for many people, we can do the times. But if you're thinking, well, my schedule is just so unpredictable, that's fine too. Consider adopting more of an eat according to a structure model, which is, again, a set number of meals and snacks, but with no times attached. The reason I prefer times attached, if possible, is because let's say, you have lunch and then dinner, and you're going to have one snack in between lunch and dinner. But you don't have a time attached to it. It just lends itself to more food thoughts. It just opens your mind up to having to make more decisions. So let's say, you're going to get a snack. It's 2 p.m. You're thinking, oh, I really feel like having a snack right now. And then you say, no, wait, let's try and wait half an hour more. And then at 2:30, you're like, oh, I really want to eat. And you're like, you know what? I think you're just feeling stressed. You're not feeling hungry. Maybe we should just try and wait a little bit longer, and then versus if I get a snack at 3:30, you look at the clock at 2 o'clock, you're like, oh, I feel like eating. And then you say to yourself, well, nope, snack's in an hour and a half, just, get busy with something else. And it really relieves your brain of having to focus on it, think about it, make decisions around it. I find that this skill in particular, eat according to a schedule, really for so many people helps start to diminish those food obsessions. It doesn't necessarily make them go away. And it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not as if we have a lot of food obsessions or no food obsessions, but I have found it really helps over time, really cut down on them, because your brain over time will get the message. I eat at those times and I don't eat at the other times. Don't bother pushing me to think about eating at times it's not time to eat, because I'm just not going to do it. Now, I have many clients who have one schedule that they follow during the week and one schedule that they follow during the weekends. And weekend might be something like, brunch, big snack, dinner, or something like that. Or maybe it is the same schedule, but everything's an hour later or something like that. That is totally fine. What we probably don't want is a different schedule for every single day of the week, just because that's way too confusing. It's way too much information to try and carry around in your head. I do have some clients who have one schedule that they follow on their work from home days, one schedule that they follow on their work in the office days, and then one schedule on the weekends. And for some people that works just fine, but you probably don't want to have like 4, 5, 6, or 7 different schedules in any one given week, because it's just, then it never really gets a chance to become a habit because it's always changing around so much. So this skill is such a good example of freedom in boundaries. I think someone could hear this skill and feel like sort of chafe against it, feel like, oh, wow, this is putting so much restriction. It's not putting restriction on what you're eating or, how much, but this one is putting some restrictions around when you're eating. And people really could feel very, like hemmed in by that. But I really do find for so many people, there's a freedom in boundaries in knowing when you're going to eat and knowing when you're not going to eat. It really frees your brain from having to make so many decisions. So I find people actually come to really love this skill. They find that this is the thing, the thing that we've done thus far that really starts to transform their eating or their eating day for them. So even if this doesn't sound great to you, and it might sound great to you, awesome. But even if it doesn't, consider at least giving it a try to see what impact it has. I was going over this with a client once, and we were going to try the breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, snack schedule. And she said to me, well, what if between breakfast and lunch, it's like, I want to eat an apple or I want to eat some vegetables. Like, is that okay if it's a healthy food? And I said to her, no, it's not okay, because it's not about what the food is or the calories in the food. It's about the habit that you're strengthening in that moment. So if you eat between breakfast and lunch, when that's not on your schedule, you are strengthening that it's okay not to stick to my schedule habit. And it might be an apple today, but tomorrow, make no mistake, it's going to be the donuts at the work meeting, right? Because once your brain gets the message, I don't have to follow my schedule. If I don't feel like it, it's going to push you to do it over and over and over and over again. It's the exact same thing as with the advantages list, how we said the skill is not read it whenever you feel like it. It's read it when you've committed to doing so. That's what will keep your on-track muscle strong. Or like with eating everything sitting down, the skill is not eat everything more than 20 calories sitting down or eat everything bigger than a dime sitting down. The skill is eat everything sitting down. That's what will teach your brain the message. We follow through. The same is true with the schedule. If you are tempted to eat, before or eat something, eat at a time that's not on your schedule, it doesn't matter what the food is or how many calories it has. It's about the habit or the muscle that you're strengthening in that moment. And not to make this too complicated, but I have seen in some of my clients, like let's say you schedule lunch at 12 to 1, and then you find, well, I'm just actually not hungry for whatever reason, 12 to 1, should I eat anyway? And I will say, and you'll have to sort of experiment for yourself, because like everything, there are so many individualities here, but for many people I have seen, it's actually far more important that they don't eat before it's time to eat than if they push it a little bit later. However, if you are someone who is likely to go all day without eating and then only eat in the evening and then overeat the evening, probably sticking to those times is more important. For other people, if it's that you are more likely to eat too frequently or too much throughout the day, I find often it's okay if it gets pushed a little later. We just don't want it to be before it's time to eat. So much of this is you'll have to sort of practice this in the wild and see how it goes for you. So that is a skill of eat according to a schedule, or if you have to, eat according to a structure. Now, let me review what skills, and I already did today, but let me review one more time what skills we have talked about thus far. Because really the next set of skills is, doing some tracking system, trying to stay under a certain number of calories or macros or points, or planning, making really robust food plans in advance, like the what is the next big piece. But we've done so much work to prepare us to be able to tackle the what. We've done so much work at strengthening our on-track muscle, at proving to ourselves, if I say I'm going to do it, it means I'm going to do it. We've done so much work to get us ready for this next step. Let's talk about all the things that we have worked on so far, and then we'll discuss for a little bit how you stay on track with all of these things. One thing for sure you want to be doing all of the time is anticipate problems and sabotaging thoughts in advance. Okay, I'm going to a wedding on Saturday. I know I'm going to be tempted to have more than one dessert. I know I'm going to be tempted to have more than 2 glasses of wine, even though I've seen that if I have 3+, it doesn't play out well for me. Okay, what are the thoughts I'm likely to have at the wedding? Okay, what do I want to be able to say to myself when I have that thought that will remind me exactly why it's worth it to me not to have the second slice of cake? And then you write it down and then you make response cards from it. So it's really helpful over time to get in the habit of anticipating problems and sabotaging thoughts in advance and making response cards for yourself so that when it does happen, you're prepared for it. Another thing you can be doing is making either memory box cards or worth it cards. These are cards like these are cards that when something significant happens and you are very viscerally aware of exactly why working on all of this stuff is so worth it. This stuff is hard. Of course it's hard. If it was easy, nobody would struggle, but the majority of people actually do struggle. This stuff is hard, but I would argue that it's so incredibly worth it. If we could bottle that feeling you get when your pair of jeans fits for like the first time in 10 years and you're like, oh my God, my pants fit. Like that is such a triumphant, exhilarating feeling. If we could bottle that, then every time you were tempted to get off track or every time you were struggling or it all felt harder, if you could just like uncork the bottle, get a whiff of it, I think you would be like, oh yeah, for sure, this is very much worth it. But in the absence of being able to bottle it, one thing we can do for ourselves is actually write down those moments on cards for ourselves. And then we can have them in the future. Memory box cards or like worth it cards, however you want to term it, are different from response cards. Response cards are cards that have helpful responses to sabotaging thoughts we either have had or are predicting that we will have. Memory box cards are cards you probably keep somewhere else, and they're not necessarily cards that you read every day. These are cards that you pull out when things feel harder, or you're in a period of struggle, or you've been off track and you're trying to get yourself motivated to get back on track. These are cards you use when the going gets tough to remind you that even though it's tough, it's worth it to keep going. I had a client and we were working on the scale of 1 dessert a day after dinner, and it was part of her plan. And she understood, hey, 1 dessert a day is that beautiful middle ground between all or nothing, between no desserts, but also not desserts all day. And she understood that 1 dessert a day was actually a critical part to helping her reach her goals because it would help her not feel deprived, but also not overdo it. And so she ate dessert in the evening, and she said to me, for the first time in 40 years, she got married. She'd been married for 40 years. She said to me, for the first time in 40 years, I ate dessert in front of my husband and I wasn't, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel embarrassed about having dessert. And she didn't feel guilty or embarrassed because it was part of her plan. And I said to her, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. Let's make sure we record that down on a card for you so that you can remember it in the future. Like that moment when she had dessert and felt good about it and made all of this feel so incredibly worth it to her. But like everything, if we don't actually write it down, we are going to forget it. That's just the way it works. So whenever you have a moment, like you are in a situation and you get through and you feel amazing at your ability to stay on track, or you get a really nice compliment from someone that is very meaningful to you, or you have, like eating, a moment where you stuck to your plan and you felt so good about it or whatever, it's so important to actually write those things down on cards, not necessarily for right now when you're in it, you're engaged with the process and feeling good. This is about the future. These cards are a really helpful relapse prevention tool. So we want you to actually physically be writing them down. That was a long-winded description, but I hope it makes sense. Another helpful technique for staying on track is the play it forward idea, or how will this make me feel when I finish eating this food? If you are at CVS and you're standing in front of the Reese's cups and you're tempted to buy a whole bag and you ask yourself, how will I feel when I finish eating this? If the answer is not good, then we want you to make decisions based on that, make decisions before you eat the food on how you'll feel when you finish, not eat the food and then have to deal with the consequences on the back end. However, this skill of playing it forward, how is this going to make me feel, is not so that you never eat anything. I had a client who was at a burger restaurant with her husband, and she was deciding between, she's going to get a burger because she really loves burgers. And she was deciding between French fries or salad as her side, and she was playing it forward. How will I feel if I eat a burger and French fries when I finish versus how will I feel if I get my indulgent deliciousness from the burger, but then also get the healthy aspect from the salad and, wind up not feeling too full? The answer was, if I do the burger and salad, I'm going to feel great. Good. Then that's what you should do. So the point of this whole play it forward, how will I feel when I finish, is not so that you never eat anything. It's just so that you can think through in advance. Will this make me feel good? Great. Let's do it. Will this not make me feel good? Okay. Probably we shouldn't do it then. This is a card a client of mine made. This client of mine had really a big struggle with pizza, just so much struggle with pizza. And he was constantly ordering a whole pizza. He lived alone and eating the whole thing. And he was doing it 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 nights per week. And he knew in theory that it was sabotaging those things on his advantages list, but he was having a really hard time not doing it. And I finally said to him one day, I said, what's so great about eating a whole pizza? What do you love about it so much? And he said, oh, it's just so wonderful. There's so much of it, sauce and the cheese, and it's so satisfying and all of that. And I said to him, okay, and how do you feel when you finish eating a whole pizza? How do you feel physically? Are you still hungry? Are you pleasantly full? Are you stuffed? And he said, no, I usually feel stuffed. It's a lot of food, a little uncomfortable. And I said, okay, and what's going through your head when you finish eating a whole pizza? Are you thinking, I'm really glad I did that? Are you neutral? Are you thinking, is there some element of regret? How are you feeling in your head? And he said, well, no, I'm never reflecting back and thinking that was a smart decision for my health. So I said, so there's some element of regret. And he said, yeah. And so it was really interesting because he just hadn't ever taken the time to gather the evidence. That's what the whole, how will this make me feel when I finish strategy is about. It's about gathering the evidence of how things make you feel, either positive or negative. And so the reason he kept ordering a whole pizza and eating it was because he was buying into the fantasy of the idea of how eating a whole pizza would make him feel, which was amazing, which was great, which was hugely satisfying. And he just completely failed to recognize the reality of what eating a whole pizza, how that made him feel, which was stuffed and regretful. But of course we can understand why he kept doing it, because he was just paying attention to the fantasy, not the reality. So he made this card that helped remind him why it was actually not worth it to do it. He called it his Pizza 911 card. And it said, the fantasy of eating a whole pizza is so much better than the reality of doing so. Eating a whole pizza makes me feel sick and bloated and unhappy. It's worth it to stop at a reasonable amount. But in order for him to really make inroads into stopping eating a whole pizza, we had to really examine what the reality of doing it was like and make decisions on that, not make decisions on what the fantasy of eating a whole pizza was like. Here's an example of a memory box card. This is a client of mine who went to visit her family, her parents, and she said, I just got back from visiting my folks, and for the first time ever, I was able to follow a plan. Having a plan didn't make me enjoy my visit less. In fact, it did just the opposite. I didn't have to waste time feeling badly about myself. I was also able to go to bed at night without feeling sick and upset about overeating. And when I was on the way home, I wasn't stressing about having to get back on track. I was on track the whole time. This was a client who she grew up, and her sister, she has a sister, and her sister, she always had weight problems since infancy, she said, and her sister never did. And so her parents, well-meaning people, but they would allow her sister to have dessert and not her. And that was really tough for her. So she was in the habit when she lived at home when she was a kid of when everyone was upstairs in bed, she would sneak downstairs into the pantry and gorge herself. And she continued that pattern even as an adult who didn't live with her parents. And so this card is pointing out to her the fact that for the first time ever, she didn't do that. And did she miss doing it? No, she felt awesome about not doing it. Okay, so that is those are some strategies, those are some techniques about how you stay on track with all of these things. Now, so significantly. Let's talk about how you get back on track, not if, when you make a mistake. And I will say, in previous webinars, I have asked participants, out of all the skills you learned, what do you think was the most important to you, or what made the biggest difference for you? And so often I will hear that it was the skill of, first of all, learning you're supposed to make mistakes, and then getting back on track, how to get back on track following a mistake, that truly made the difference. So I'm hoping if getting off track and then staying off track is something that you have struggled with in the past, that this will start to make a difference. The first thing you want to do when you make a mistake, an eating mistake, is you want to label it a mistake. This is not a catastrophe. This is not the end of the world. This is simply a mistake. And you want to watch out for self-criticism and name calling, like, I can't believe this happened. I'm so stupid. I'm so weak. This is terrible. No, it's not. I always say to my clients, when you make an eating mistake, the only thing it says about you as a person is that you are indeed a person, because nobody is perfect and you are not supposed to be perfect in this whole thing. That being said, I understand why people sort of like expect perfection from themselves or want perfection from themselves when it comes to eating or working on making these changes, because probably in the past they have felt like it's this Jenga game. This is me dieting and going to the gym for 5 months, and then I'll just eat one cookie, right? Like, I understand why people do, to a certain degree, live in fear of making mistakes, because in the past, it may be true that when they did make a mistake, it was like pulling out the wrong Jenga block and the entire tower toppled over on them. But the good news is this whole thing is not a Jenga game. It doesn't matter which block you choose to pull out. You always have the ability to keep a sturdy tower. So I understand why people have in the past feared making mistakes, because they didn't know, first of all, they were supposed to make mistakes, and they didn't know what to do when they did to help them get right back on track. So good news, this is not a Jenga game. This is whatever the opposite of a Jenga game is. These are Legos that are, super glued together, whatever. We're building a sturdy foundation is what I'm trying to say. So let's talk about what happens when people make mistakes. I find that when people make eating mistakes, so first of all, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but for sure, unquestionably, the most common sabotaging thought out of any of them that I hear, the one that I don't think I've ever had a client not espouse, at least one time or another, is the thought, I've made a mistake, I've really blown it for the day, or I made a mistake, I might as well throw in the towel, and get back on track tomorrow. I've blown it, might as well keep eating whatever I want, get back on track tomorrow. Sound familiar to any of you? So when people make a mistake, and especially when they have a thought like that, it really can convince them it doesn't really matter from this point on what happens the rest of the day. It's almost as if people think there's like a calorie damage quota they can do. And once they reach that quota, whatever happens beyond that is immaterial. It's like, oh, I've already taken in 2,000 extra calories today. So what's the difference if I take in another 2,000 extra calories? The difference is that's 2,000 more calories of ground that you've just lost here. So it is so much better, if you're off track, to stop at like 300 extra calories than it is 500. It is so much better to stop at 500 extra than it is 800. It is so much better to stop at 800 extra than 1,000. 1,000 then 1,500. 1,500 calories is so much better than stopping at 2,500 calories. Any bite of food you continue to eat in an off-track way, on an off-track day, is more calories that your body processes and more weight that you gain and more ground that you have to make up. It is not true that if you've taken in X number of extra calories, it doesn't matter if you take in then Y and Z amount. The answer is it all matters, and it all keeps adding up. And that's why you want to give yourself credit for stopping at any time. Let's say you catch at the 800 calorie mark or the 1,000 calorie mark. Great. That is so much better than catching it at the 2,000 calorie mark or the 3,000 calorie mark. So make sure you give yourself a whole lot of credit anywhere you can catch it. Another thing you can do, again, getting back to the skill of playing it forward, I just keep putting it in because I think it can be an incredibly powerful one, is, let's say you make a mistake, you're at brunch with your friends and you get off track and you're thinking, I've blown it for the day, might as well keep eating. Play it forward. How are you going to feel when you go to bed at night if you continue to eat and drink in an off-track way for the rest of the day? Versus how are you going to feel at night if you catch it right there and say, whoops, I overate at brunch. That's fine. I'll just go on and have a normal, healthy dinner and, and then go to bed and, having known I can recover. How was that going to feel? So playing it forward can be really, really important in terms of how do I want to feel when I go to bed at night? Because the way I'm feeling right now is not how I have to feel when I go to bed at night. If you do make a mistake in the middle of the day and you actually catch it and you recover and then you go on to have, on track rest of the day, you can go to bed at night feeling triumphant of your ability to catch yourself in the middle of the day, instead of feeling, upset, stuffed, regretful, mad at yourself. So you have the ability to actually catch yourself and go to bed that night feeling amazing. But that only happens if we don't buy into I've made a mistake, I might as well keep eating, get back on track tomorrow. Another thing we want to do is look out for this catastrophizing, this all or nothing thinking. Since I made one mistake, the entire day is shot. Since I ate way over 8 at brunch, I'm totally on track or I'm totally off track. It doesn't really work that way. Like as a separate example, I had a client who she was Australian and she was coming to the US for 2 weeks. And she said to me, I'm so worried that I'm going to make a mistake on day 2 and blow it for the trip. And I said to her, good news. It is impossible to make a mistake on day 2 and blow it for the whole trip. It is possible to blow it on day 2, blow it again on day 3, blow it again on day 4, blow it again on day 5. But there's not such a thing as making a mistake on day 2, catching it right there and going on to have a great rest of your trip. You never need, nothing you ever do in a day is so egregious that you have blown it for the day. It simply doesn't work that way. And we really ask everyone to come up with at least one mistake analogy that they can hold in their head for not if, when they make a mistake. So what are some of these mistake analogies? So to back up a bit, if you have the thought, I've made a mistake, I've blown it for the day, I might as well keep eating in an off-track way and get back on track tomorrow, or get back on track on Monday, or get back on track on January 1st, or whatever. Essentially what you're doing in that moment is telling yourself, since I screwed up, it makes sense for me to continue screwing up. And it's a very good reminder that in virtually no other area of life would we ever buy into this notion that since I screwed up, I might as well keep screwing up. The example in the Beck diet solution is if you were driving in your car and you blew a stop sign and a cop pulled you over and gave you a ticket, would you think, well, I've blown safe driving today, I might as well keep blowing stop signs and I'll start driving carefully again tomorrow? No. What would you do? You would stop at the very next stop sign. My 2 favorite examples are, another car one is, if you were driving on the highway and you missed your exit, would you drive 5 more hours in the wrong direction? No, of course not. What would you do? You'd get off at the very next exit, turn around and get yourself right back on track. Or if you were walking down a flight of stairs and stumbled down a few, would you say, well, I've blown this stairwell, and throw yourself down the rest of the stairs? No. What would you do? You would get up right from the stair where you fell and walk down the rest. There are dozens, hundreds of examples. If you were washing your grandma's china and you dropped a plate and smashed it, would you say, whoops, so I've blown this set and then smashed the rest? Or, if you drove over a nail and popped a tire, would you say, well, I've blown this car and popped the rest of the tires? No. If you're making a 3-egg omelet, you dropped an egg on the floor, would you say, well, I've blown this omelet and chucked the other 2 eggs down? No. What would you do? You'd probably make a 2-egg omelet, right? So continuing to eat in an off-track way is like blowing more stop signs. It is driving more hours in the wrong direction. It is throwing yourself down more stairs. It is throwing the rest of the eggs on the ground. We wouldn't do it in other areas. And so we can't buy into the idea that it makes sense in this area too. So it's really important though, if any of those analogies resonated with you, great, but you could probably come up with, based on what you do or whatever, 1,000 other ones. I have a client who's a lawyer, and hers is, if I lost 1 page of a client folder, would I shred the rest? No. And she remind herself, don't keep shredding papers. That's what she says to herself if she gets off track. So come up with at least one, probably just one major one, and write it down on a response card so that you can remind yourself it doesn't make sense to continue in an off-track way. And one of the things I'm always saying to my clients is you are entitled to make mistakes in this process. You are supposed to. Nobody learns to speak French without conjugating a verb wrong. You're supposed to make mistakes. You are entitled to make mistakes. What you're not entitled to do, however, is to use one mistake as an excuse to keep making more. That's what you're not entitled to do. You are absolutely entitled to make mistakes. You're just not entitled to say, since I made a mistake, it's okay to keep making more. That's where we are trying to draw the line here. And it is a good reminder that when you get off track, sometimes people say to themselves, just do the next right thing or do the next on-track thing. When you have made a mistake and you're feeling a bit off track, your very next eating decision, and it's probably somewhere between like 15 seconds and 15 minutes away, is your next opportunity to get right back on track. If you make the next decision in an on-track way, guess what? Congratulations, you're back on track. So here's some good sabotaging thoughts. I've already blown it for the day. Might as well keep eating whatever I want for the rest of the day and get back on track tomorrow. And here's a response card for that. There is no such thing as blowing it for the day. I can get back on track right in this moment. When you are off track, it can also be helpful, or if you're feeling a bit off track, read your advantages list, read your response cards, remind yourself exactly why it's worth it to you to catch it right here. Remind yourself exactly why it's worth it to you to get back on track. Here's a response card one of my clients made. This is in her own words, of course. When I'm off track, I feel out of control. When I'm on track, I feel like a boss. I feel more like myself. It's worth it. And reading this card in particular for this one client of mine, when she was, feeling shaky or making some off-track decisions, reading this just was like a shot to the gut. It was a complete reminder to her, nope, off-track is not the way I want to exist. This is the way I want to feel. And it just really helped her get right back on track. Another thing to really pay attention to is if you make a mistake or get off track midday, oftentimes people have the instinct to say, oh, well, I've already way overeaten today. Let's say it's like after lunch or something. I better not eat anything else for the rest of the day. And then, I can resume normal eating tomorrow. And one of the things we really caution people against this, first of all, because that's like punishing yourself. If you make an eating mistake, you do not deserve punishment. You're human. And the second reason we say don't buy into this thought of, oh, I better not eat anything else for the rest of the day is because it tends not to work anyway. What happens is someone overeats at brunch and then she has the thought, oops, I've way overeaten. I better not eat anything else for the rest of the day. And then like 8 p.m. rolls around and she starts to legitimately feel hungry. And then the anxiety kicks in and she thinks, uh-oh, I'm hungry, but I'm not supposed to eat anything else for the rest of the day. And then it's a really easy leap to then have her next thought be, you know what, this is too hard. I'm off track anyway, screw it. And I'll get back on track tomorrow. And then she goes on to eat way more than she would if she had just had a normal, reasonable dinner. So don't buy into this idea of it makes sense to not eat anything else for the rest of the day. First of all, because you don't deserve punishment. And second of all, it tends not to work anyway. So all this being said, that you're supposed to make mistakes, that you will make mistakes. This is a skill acquisition process. This is a learning process. I always say like nobody learns to play tennis without missing a ball. It's a good reminder. Like I still make eating mistakes all the time, right? Like even professional tennis players miss balls in a match, right? What they don't do when they, lose a point is slam down their racket, storm off the court and quit tennis, right? What do they do if they miss a point or they miss a ball? They just get their head back in and try and hit the next ball. So you're allowed to miss balls. You're just not allowed to slam your racket down, storm off the court and quit. What you do when you miss a ball is just try and, recenter your head and hit the next one. That's what we're trying to do here. And to really focus on, the majority of your attention is focusing on what do I need to do to get back on track? All of this being said, we're not pretending that mistakes don't happen. We're not saying when you do make a mistake, pay zero attention to it because, and I mean this so genuinely, we learn just as much from challenges as we do from successes. When something goes really well, a client's in a really challenging circumstance and he comes out ahead and he has stuck to his plan and he's feeling great, we're saying to him, Awesome job. What did you do in that moment? What did you say to yourself that was so effective? Because if it worked once, chances are it's going to work again. But challenges work in the same way. When something doesn't go well, when someone's in a situation he's not able to stick to his plan, or he does get off track, we're always saying to himself, okay, what was the situation? What were the sabotaging thoughts you had in that moment? Because one thing we know is if he had it once, chances are he's going to have it again. And it's a really good opportunity to say to ourselves, what would I like to say to myself the next time I'm in a similar circumstance? What would I like to say to myself the next time I have that sabotaging thought? Because we can learn an enormous amount from mistakes about what thoughts we're likely to have. And then we can try and figure out, okay, what am I going to say to myself the next time? So as a really objective, non-judgmental, quick technique, one thing you can do when you do recognize, oops, I just made that big mistake, sort of like once you've come out of it, you have a little bit of perspective looking back, is the 3-question technique. You ask yourself, what was the situation? What happened? Oh, I was out at happy hour with my coworkers and I ended up having more chips and an extra margarita, like consume much more than I had planned. What sabotaging thoughts did I have? Everyone else is eating and drinking this amount, so it's okay. I can too. Okay, great. What do I want to say to myself the next time I'm in this circumstance or similar circumstance, or the next time I have the thought, everyone else is eating and drinking a lot, so I can too. Maybe it's something like, my body doesn't know or care what anyone around me is consuming. I can't make decisions based on what other people are doing. I have to make decisions based on what works for me, and then if you come up with a response that you think would be really helpful, what do you have to then do next? Write it down, make a response card, because like I've said, you can come up for yourself with the absolute best response that if you might think, if I have that helpful response, the next time I have that sabotaging thought, I know it will make a really big difference. You can come up with the absolute best response, but unless you actually write it down and read it, make a response card and then read it over and over again, it's just not going to be there for you when you need it. It's going to make virtually no difference. So if you do come up with responses to thoughts that you had based on mistakes you've made, make sure you write it down and then read it with your response cards every day so that you're able to access it in the moment when you need it the next time. Okay, so your homework for week 5 is, number 1, decide your eating schedule. There is absolutely no right or wrong. I hope I stressed that enough. Whatever you think you can stick to, whatever will work for you is the best one. And then if you find out it's actually not working for you, modify it. Modify where, when, and how you need to. We talked about like a getting back on track technique. A staying on track technique is continuing to make response cards, make memory box cards, continue to gather the evidence, to pay attention to how eating certain foods make you feel, both in the positive evidence bank and in the negative evidence bank. And then when you make a mistake, adopt the 3-question technique. Learn from it. Once you learn from it, then we move on completely. Because once we have gathered the kernels of, the helpful ideas that we want to remember for the next time, once we've really taken the opportunity to learn from it, then it's time to just move on completely. Then continuing to ruminate on it will do nothing helpful. The only thing it will do is lower your mood, make you feel worse, undermine your sense of confidence, make getting back on track harder. So once you take the opportunity to learn from it, then you move on completely. So thank you, everyone. This is your homework for week 5. I will see you all back here next week for week 6, and I will answer some questions in the 6 minutes we have left before I need to go pick up my son who has puked at daycare. Let's see. Someone says, fantastic. I had a great success resisting candy my kids were using to decorate cookies for 4 hours. Wow. Gave in a bit, but then didn't binge out and gave up and didn't binge out and give up that night. Good for you. Next morning, lost a pound. And instead of beating myself, I praised myself for making it 4 hours. So totally right. Good for you. And it's a good reminder that you can have a night where things go a little bit awry, but you caught yourself and then the scale was actually down the next day versus if you gotten a little bit off track and then use as an excuse to stay off track for the rest of the day. There's no chance the scale would have been down the next day. So, mistakes, if we catch them right there, they're minor, they're blips on the radar. They make no difference in terms of the overall picture of the day or the week. It's when we make one mistake and then make more and more and more, that's when it really impacts the overall picture. Someone says, I need 2 snacks between breakfast and lunch, then a cup of tea mid-afternoon, a small dinner, and no snack. I'm so hungry in the mid-morning. Yeah, so interesting, right? And I have some clients who are never hungry mid-morning. It's also individual, but I'm glad that you know that about yourself. Someone said, I guess I need 2 morning eating schedules, one for days I spin at 6 a.m. and one for days I don't. Yeah, that might be, that's probably true. I struggle and spend days to get a schedule before lunch. So you probably just need to like take a moment and sit, think about, okay, on a spin day, what is realistic? What could a realistic schedule look like for me? Because it's not like, oh, I can't have any schedule. Even though it's a struggle, it doesn't mean we can't figure it out. I know this is going ahead, but I'll be with food pushers this weekend. Any quick tips? My best tip for food pushers is first of all, it's like the broken record technique. It's the no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. May I remind you, you never need to give any reason why you're saying no, thank you. It is up to you to decide how much information you do or don't want to divulge. What we find eventually is that if someone says no, thank you enough, that eventually the food pusher will give up. But there's also the issue of sometimes people don't feel entitled to say no to food pushers. And I remind them, if you had a severe peanut allergy and someone was offering you or trying to push peanut butter cookies on you, you would never dream of saying yes. Because you knew it would put you into anaphylactic shock. If you were a vegetarian and someone was pushing bacon on you, you would never dream of saying, well, okay, I'll have this bacon. Or you kept kosher. You wouldn't say, well, okay, they're really pushing it. I'll have this bacon, right? People would feel completely legitimized to say no if it was like an allergy, if it was a vegetarian, if it was kosher or something like that. Those things on your advantages list, those are equally legitimate reasons to say no. That is your health and happiness. Those are legitimate reasons to say no. And I often help client remember that, do a quick cost benefit analysis. Well, it may be a cost to the food pusher if you say no. Yeah, I'm not saying that won't disappoint them, but chances are it will be a far greater cost to you if you say yes and then reinforce the pushing habit and then, and then get off track. And people often will say to me, if so-and-so, my mother-in-law would just stop pushing food on me, this would be a lot easier. And I say, well, the mistake you're making is you're putting the burden of change on your mother-in-law, not on yourself. Your mother-in-law is a food pusher. That's her job. She's supposed to push food on you. It's not her job to stop pushing food. It is, however, your job to start saying no. I'm worried if I eat more than 2 to 3 meals and no snacks, I'll gain weight. I'm worried if I eat more than 2 to 3 meals and no snack. Well, do we know? Try it out, right? How do we know? Gaining weight is it's not necessarily wholly a matter of when you eat. It's a matter of how much you eat, right? So, and maybe, then maybe when we start talking about the how much next week, hopefully that will help cut down on some of that anxiety. Someone says, with food pushers, I say thank you in a little bit. They usually forget about it. Or sometimes I'll have a client say, I'm so stuffed right now. I just couldn't eat another bite. That can be helpful. Or like I have a client who's trying not to eat sugar or cut back on sugar, right? And so she might say, oh, this looks delicious, but sugar just gives me a terrible headache. So I can't. And I always remind them, it's not really a lie, because if they ate the sugar, got off track, continued to eat sugar for the rest of the day, that would be a terrible headache. It would be an emotional, psychological headache, but it would actually cause a headache. So, I also think sometimes like little innocuous things like that can be helpful. Whatever someone needs to do to feel entitled to say no. And I will say the first time you're standing up to a food pusher, the first maybe 1, 2, or 3 times are the hardest. Once the food pusher learns, oh, Debbie just never has beer no matter how much I push on them, then like eventually they just stop, right? But you have to sort of set the standard now, and it will get easier moving forward. Okay, so I hope everyone has a great week, and I will see you all back here for our last week together, week 6. See everyone next Monday. Bye.